My name is Jean-Luc Salant. I'm going to present this work and I'm going to be helped out by Sanjay Mitra, who works in our fundraising department. Over to you, Sanjay.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to say very little at this moment, but I'm going to be here monitoring any questions you'll have. And if you do have questions, just put them in the chat box and I'll try and get through as many as I can. And also, if you keep yourself muted throughout the talk as well, please. And if you still have the main stream on, just want to mute that or close that window down and just stay on this Zoom call. I am actually going to read your bio out, Jean-Luc. For those of you who know, Jean-Luc is a very modest man, but here we go. You'll have to forgive me. It's pretty obvious I'm reading from a phone. So Dr. Jean-Luc Salant, he is a marine biologist with over 1,000 dives. He has worked with partners in 4 continents to deliver positive change to marine ecosystem management. He currently is working on seagrass restoration projects in the UK coastal waters. He coordinates coastal reef research and surveys in the Maldives, and is lobbying for a greener economic model post-COVID that seeks to base decision-making on carbon-friendly technologies. He's been most successful in applying environmental legislation to properly protect marine habitats in UK seas. Jean-Luc, straight over to you.
Thanks. I'm very much looking forward to this session and the Q&A afterwards. I think it's a way we can really find out about how people think of this sort of subject area, but it's probably the most complicated one to communicate in the Marine Conservation Society. We always have problems dealing with these issues internally as much as externally. So I've called the presentation Marine Unprotected Areas, What's in a Name? The interesting thing for me is just trying to work out and deconstruct what we all think of marine protected areas. So first of all, I'll start with a wee bit of history. So we've had extraordinary progress, as Peter Richardson described, of the number of marine protected areas. We really started from nothing in about 1981 with the Wildlife and Countryside Act, where there were only 3 sites designated over a 10-year timescale. In 1986, we got Lundy Island. In 1991, we got Skomer. And in 1996, we got Strangford Lough in Northern Ireland. It was really slow in terms of the legislative drivers to start marine protected areas in this country. More excitingly, perhaps, we got EU regulations that allowed us to do something, to designate EU marine sites, but they were for only a small amount of biodiversity in the marine environment. They were only for 8 species or so and about 8 habitats. So they were very broad scale. Things like seals, some species of dolphins and cetaceans were protected, reefs, sandbanks. So we needed to upscale our protection in terms of the detail and in terms of the number of habitats and areas protected. So NGOs and civil society lobbied governments to introduce this bespoke legislation in 2009 called the Marine Coastal Access Act, and in Scotland, the Marine Scotland Act in 2010. So there was great success and an amount of effort to make sure that law helped set up sites. And now we have, you probably know of 91 marine conservation zones in English waters. There are something in excess of 33 nature conservation marine protected areas in Scottish waters as a result of these acts. And we have largely completed the network, including vast harbour, porpoise and basking shark sites in recent years. And just in September, the end of September, there was this huge area, you might be able to see my cursor here, of the northwest of Scotland, the largest marine protected area in the entirety of European seas, measuring about 100,000 square kilometres. So that's bigger than the landmass of Scotland, or around about the landmass of Scotland. So have we overdone it? Have we overcooked the pudding? 36% of UK seas. How on earth, from the late 80s to now, are we going to deal with this lot? They have special protection related to them. So and where are these protected areas? Well, this is a map of the habitats in UK seas. Yellow is effectively sand, brown is muds, the pinkish areas much nearer to the coast, and the light bluish areas are more reef and coarse sand sediment areas. And most of the marine protected areas you have not only overlay sand, mud, and mixed habitats like sediment and gravel. Most of them by designation are meant to protect something to do with the seabed and the biodiversity on the seabed. But the biggest problem the Marine Conservation Society has, and all of the NGOs that are fighting for our seas, is that we protect the biology associated with those habitats, would you believe? To a lay person and a normal person on the street, they would think automatically that that would be the case. But the problem is trying to make sure that we're really focusing on the biology rather than the maintenance of sand, gravel, and muds as a physical substrate. And this is where our biggest crisis happens. And because of this, and because of the weak management associated with many marine protected areas, particularly in the offshore, we kind of think of marine protected areas as an idea. They were almost something that came out with this book, many of you will have read, which I encourage you to read, which provides a history to the sea. Now, before we even designated marine protected areas, the areas that they're in were already pretty badly damaged because we are an industrial nation. Now, the perspective on that damage depends on which point of view you come from initially. You might be if you're a fisher, you might perceive the damage to only be something related to your stock of fish that you're catching. If you do ports and harbors, you might perceive damage to be something that stops the ability of boats to be moored and anchored safely and berthed safely. So different people have a different idea of what the marine environment should give to them. And then people have a different idea of what a marine protected area is and are. They are complicated things, unfortunately. And that complication, as I alluded to, with just those two examples of fishers and someone who runs a port and harbour, relate to the rules of those sites. They differ for each site. The culture associated with the use of the site, and my culture as a fisherman, my culture as someone who runs a port, my culture who does wind farms, for example. So there are a lot of interesting things there. There are freedoms and norms associated with them, like the freedom, the right to fish. Those factors really do affect how we think about marine protected areas and the normative association of the use of the marine environment. For example, it used to be normal to smoke in a pub. It used to be normal to smoke in a public space on a train carriage. Is it normal to trawl in a marine protected area? Yes, it is to some people. We don't think it should be, perhaps. And then there is this ambition at the big picture side. So Boris Johnson might say things like, yes, we want to do these great reforms in a blustering tone. But when it comes down to individual sites, each site has a fight. So we can be ambitious on the face of it, which is what 36% is. But when you get to the nitty gritty of managing at the site level, we are not protecting them all. There are governance issues, i.e. who are the actors at play to deal with the protected areas close to the coast versus those that are offshore. Close to the coast, we have a plethora of stakeholders from different parts of society. Offshore, it tends to be oil and gas, wind, cables, aggregate extraction and fishing. That sounds complicated, but that's not so complicated as inshore. And then we have these problems of devolution. We've devolved nature conservation management to our different countries. What's that going to play out like with Brexit? And because of these complexities and because of the weak ambition and because of the environmental baseline being set at a time when many of our seas are affected by industrial use, I feel largely they fail. Sometimes and seldomly they succeed. And think of it now, we have 36% of our EEZ in a marine protected area around the UK. That means about 220,000 square kilometres of seabed. Of course, largely they don't do anything because there's so much of it. How are we going to deal with management for this vast network? That's what that point is. Where do we progress? Where do we prioritize? And that's what we've been grappling with within our ocean recovery team, within the work of Jill's team and Callum's team for at least a decade. Callum, Jill, myself, and Peter have been at MCS for way over 10 years. So we know the history of this work. So how have we worked on it? We've used law. We recently, in September, produced a report with colleagues in other NGOs around Europe and within the UK to challenge the thinking of how we use law in the Dogger Bank Special Area of Conservation. And we're hopeful that in January, the government is going to actually budge on the Dogger Bank and protect it. We've used our own science and the science from collaborators at Plymouth University and Exeter University in particular, but Callum's used people from the University of Glasgow to give us an understanding of what marine protected areas could be in terms of the species use of those areas, how communities change over time. And we produced 2 or 3 papers just in recent months with a bunch of co-authors. Also, we've got a really exciting piece of work coming out from the Eddystone reef off Cornwall and Devon, which is showing that when you stop the trawling, the seabed life recovers in sandy areas as well as on the designated reef features. So I think we are trying to provide evidence to reinforce our position all the time. We commissioned science. Callum commissioned the University of Glasgow to give a perspective on something absolutely vital, which is the integrity of seafloor ecosystems, of which the authors essentially said we can't tell what's going on. We need to have some precautionary management built into the system. We would suggest from this work that suggests that we should protect the seabed because we don't really know whether trawling affects it in certain ways in certain places. That's kind of our summation from the report. We do some really exciting work with local communities through the work of Peter Richardson and Sue Ranger and Alice Tebb with the Agents of Change project. We focused in on communities and inshore fisheries and conservation authorities that require more in-depth help to really understand what their communities think about protected areas, involve those communities equally with an equal voice, a genuine equal voice in debates over marine protected area management, which has been essential to providing protection for some sites. The media has been getting more and more interested about the opportunities post-Brexit. There's a chap called Ben Webster, who's the oceans correspondent of the Times, who's been illustrating the Greenpeace activity of dropping blocks on the Dogger Bank. He's also talked about this story about a paper that came out showing that if we protect a small part of the ocean with highly protected marine areas, we'll get a net gain from such work. And without collaboration, we won't really see our work go forwards. We need to collaborate outside of MCS, and we've always done that in the 10 to 20 years that I've been working on MPAs. And it's a long game. Now, where have we seen successes? All our successes are inshore. Here's just an example. Cromer Shoals Chalk Reef has seen a bottom-towed fishing gear ban, and much of that has been accepted by local communities, largely because of a really good project called the Agents of Change program, run by Alice Tebb, who works in Norfolk, Suffolk, and with that Ithaca, and also in Sussex waters, with separate communities. And instead of us providing the messages of what MPAs are about, the Agents of Change project, the clue's in the name, tries to get local community members to talk about MPAs to community members. We also have worked many years ago on the Fowl and Helford and protected the merle beds, which are the richest merle beds in England, from scallop dredging and from port dredging. Just a bit close nearby that, the Eddystone Reef project I talked about a little bit earlier, where we've got 7 years of benthic data with high resolution cameras, which hopefully will be published in January or February or so, showing sediment recovery. Kingmere Reef, that's a really interesting MPA that Pete and Sue have worked on with another community voice project method. And that site was designated and protected for a fish. Would you believe there's a marine protected area that is protecting a fish species? We've only got about 3 of them. I don't know why. I agree with you. It seems daft. But this is one of the sites protecting this fish called a black bream, and its nesting sites are now protected. In Arran, Callum Duncan was instrumental at the beginning of the process in training the community up in terms of diving and learning about sea search and using sea search to illustrate important habitats. And we've already heard about the Dornoch environmental project to repopulate an ancient oyster habitat with brand new oysters. And that's, I think, the future. I think oyster regeneration projects, bivalve regeneration projects is the future for many of our inshore, more sedimentary seabeds. And more recently, and then we do slightly more removed work. So some of the work we've done at Skomer Island is simply to turn up and do a dive to help the volunteer program every year. They run a wonderful volunteer program at the Skomer Marine Reserve, and you can dive there and record annually either urchins, territorial fish, scallops, and seagrass. So I've been on 2 or 3 of those surveys. They're delightful things to be part of. So there's a panoply of habitats and animals and plants here we've just described in 5 minutes, but it shows the importance, I think, of really protecting the entirety of the marine environment and thinking where we can work. And possibly the biggest success we had, oh no, I have to talk about Plymouth first of all. We talked about seagrass a little bit earlier. We're in an exciting phase of a project, well, apart from COVID restricting fieldwork the past year, but we've been able to install some environmentally friendly moorings where the riser chain is risen off the seabed by the use of subtidal buoys, funded by Princess Yachts initially, but now we have a multi-partner project with EU life funding. So there are indications of success. And then some of the most exciting success has been through inshore management, not offshore, with the use of IFCAs producing bylaws to close certain waters to bottom-towed fishing gear. And I'll illustrate some of that stuff a little bit in a bit of time. So there has been, and this was also replicated, some of these measures in Welsh waters for scallop dredging and in 19 high-risk inshore sites in Scotland. And Callum Duncan can talk to you about that till the cows go out, as can I. Now, another resource I want to introduce you to, because the title of the talk is Marine Unprotected Areas. Now, I've just illustrated about 7 sites where there is protection, and there's pretty good protection. But offshore, we have a problem. Offshore, outside 12 nautical miles, the protection of marine protected areas has been within the gift of the Common Fisheries Policy in a clause called Article 11 in the law. And that has meant that every single time we wanted to close a protected area offshore, we had to ask Europe and the panoply of fishing interests that wanted to fish in those sites of their opinion of our proposed management. Ergo, they failed because everyone wants to fish in everyone else's marine protected area. We produced a new layer to a website we already have called MPA Reality Check that has got a seabed trawling layer added. It shows the metrics of the habitats that are protected. It shows the statistics of the levels of protection by different regulator. And we're producing a report in January 2021. We hope to go to MPs that will talk about the level of fishing in these marine protected areas from our data analysis, and also extrapolates that understanding of trawling in terms of the potential net carbon loss to the UK marine environment from such activity, as described by Peter a little earlier, that when we released organic carbon trapped in sediments, it goes into the water column and then over time diffuses and goes into the atmosphere, causing further long-term climate change. So we must lock down our carbon. We must provide the opportunity for that carbon to grow. So I'm just going to go over to the website that slide was from, called MPA Reality Check. I urge you to look at this because we spend a lot of time with a really excellent guy from the University of Plymouth who has his own consultancy, Tom Moulier from Marine Mapping. This is a plug for him and his work as much as it is for this work. Now, when you open it, this is the visual you get. It really focuses on England at the moment. And you get all these ability to click on, if you can see my cursor on the left, to the type of marine protected areas that we have. Those are the European ones called Special Areas of Conservation. You can click on the site itself and understand what the regulation is. And then you can also click on to marine conservation zones to see where they are. And you can see, if you click onto them, you can see what they are there for and what sort of features are protected in them. And then most recently, we've actually produced a fishing activity layer. If you click on down there, we can see the activity of fisheries from all European fleets of above 15 meters in size. So it's only looking at the big vessels. And you can see how much fishing is actually taking place in a marine protected area you might be interested in. So here's one that's definitely fished a lot by the Dutch pulse trawl fishing fleet called Haysborough, Hammond and Winterton. And if we click on it, you can see the site and you can see the number of hours of fishing that had taken place in the years between 2015 and 2018. A red line indicates that this marine protected area was designated before 2015. When you get a blue line as part of this portion of the line, that would suggest that the designation happens after the fishing data has been included. So you can really drill down in this web resource to the levels of fishing taking place in our marine protected areas. And this will be the essence of our report we will release in 2020, in January 2021, by our colleague Frith Dunkley, who also works in the ocean recovery team. So the metrics are fairly stark. They're pretty awful in terms of the number of hours of fishing taking place in marine protected areas, making them essentially in the offshore marine environment unprotected. So I just wanted to end on that, but sorry, just as well, just a little plug for the rest of the website. You can look at statistics in the type of protection that is happening in different regions. You can see the who's fishing, who's protecting what in which part of the coast. So Cornwall Ifka has protected about 408 square kilometers out of about 1,000 square kilometers of marine protected area from bottom-towed fishing gear. So it's a reality check about bottom-towed fishing gear. It's not about anything else. We think fundamentally, if we're not protecting the seabed in marine protected areas that are meant to be protected for the seabed, then they aren't protected areas. And we can look at a history of designation, and then there's more information on those top tabs about protection in the different areas. So you can really use it as a tool to find out how things are going. And it is iterative. It won't just stand alone. So I just wanted to go over that resource. And now back to the final slide. Thank you for being patient with me and the technology. I wanted to just, I hope there's a giggle happening now. I'll just go back to slide view. What we really want to do over the next 4 years is to keep those local projects working, because inshore we really see progress, I think. We want to see management of the offshore sites. There are 4 consultations at the moment out of 72 marine protected areas in offshore waters. It's unbelievable the slow pace of change in government. Why are we just looking at 4 sites? We have 73 or 72. I mean, I don't know when we're going to actually deal with these issues. And it's, as Peter says, there's a climate emergency, there's a biodiversity emergency. We need to fund this work and make sure that the agencies that are doing good work are funded. That means the IFCAs, these inshore fisheries and conservation authorities, they're producing regulations to protect sites from fishing. We need to illustrate the carbon losses from poor practice of management and keep our eyes on Europe. And I don't know about you, I just put this in. I'm in stage 3 of quarantine. I am this person with the black eyes. I have not had a haircut in a long while, but that doesn't matter for me. I'm not going this far. I didn't ever look like that. Felt selfies are not my thing. I don't know where you are. I'm here, but I really look forward to being back here, this beautiful lady who sat for hours for a lovely Italian polymath. So anyway, that's me done on marine protected areas. Sanjay, have you got any questions that have come up?
Thanks, Jean-Luc. That was great. Yeah, we are at the end of the session, but if people are okay to stay for a couple of minutes, we've got loads of questions. If you can answer quite succinctly, JL.
I'll do my best.
Yeah. Okay. So first, from Lindsay, how can we ensure that MPA objectives are actually met to avoid the sort of kind of paper park effect?
We can see through. We understand what's happening from scientific literature when you manage in a certain way. We have to extrapolate from those places that we've done some science that we know that MPAs or marine biodiversity responds in a particular way. That's why we're so obsessed with, or I'm obsessed with, bottom-towed fishing gear, because there's good amount of literature that says that's not very good for the seabed. So we can assess them by their management, and then in certain sites we call sentinel sites, and we published a paper on this in January, we can keep an eye out on how things progress. Eddystone is becoming one of those where we've done our work. Lyme Bay is one, Arran is another. There are some sites around the UK, and we've got to use those to convince society and governments and fishers that this is the way forward.
Thanks. And from Sarah, what is MCS currently doing to protect cold water corals in the UK?
Nothing personally directly, but there are a lot of sites in Scottish waters that are protecting deep water corals. And I do know those northwestern Scotland on the edge of the continental shelf, those sites are closed below 600 meters automatically to bottom-towed fishing gears. And Callum Duncan, our Scottish conservation manager, will be able to respond to that either by email in terms of whether separate regulations have come in shallower of 600 meters where the corals exist.
Great. Obviously, we've got a Scotland theme of the evening today, so I'll read one from Caitlin. Can no-take zones be established in Scottish MPAs in a similar way to that established in Cabo Pulmo, which I think is Mexico area, isn't it?
Well, that's what. Sorry.
Yeah, which saw such great success for both fisheries, tourism.
Well, yeah, there was a lawyer who worked for the Community of Arran Seabed Trust called Tom Appleby, and he proved to Scottish Parliament that they could use in fishing law to close the site. So the similar law could be used tomorrow in terms of fishing. It doesn't necessarily, you'd have to use another piece of legislation to protect sites from other activities, perhaps, but fisheries law can be used.
Right. I'll probably be able to fit in one more. Apologies for everybody who did get questions in. It's quite an interesting one from Stefano. Is it possible to quantify the value of MPAs in terms of, for example, carbon capture?
We're getting better. Yeah. I mean, our assessment of looking at a paper that was done by a CFAS scientist with colleagues, associated authors from the University of East Anglia, suggested that the seabed of the UK has about 220 megatons of carbon in it in shelf sediments, and that is the biggest habitat in the UK environment, land and sea, shelf sediments. And if we keep trawling them, the estimate we've come up with is that we'll lose £1 billion worth of carbon by 2040. So a metric exists. We've extrapolated that from our understanding of the shelf carbon sediment from mapping work we've done, Frith Dunkley has done, and come up with that estimate. If we don't do anything about this, we could lose that sort of figure. Now, of course, it's not exact. It's extremely coarse science, but trawling is not good for carbon sequestration of the marine environment. So we're getting better at that, and we're working with another project with partners in Europe and New Economics Foundation to do socioeconomic assessments of the restriction of bottom trawls in marine protected areas around Europe. So we're trying to get a bit more cute in a sense of what the Treasury might be interested in terms of marine protected areas, rather than nature conservationists, which doesn't belittle the nature conservation value of what these areas could be, of course.
Great. All right. Well, thanks very much, Jean-Luc, and thank you for everyone for joining this session.
Thank
So
you.
apologies if we didn't get to your questions. If you do have any unanswered questions, just get in touch with us at info@mcsuk.org, and we'll pass it on to Jean-Luc. That's it from us. And the next session, we've got a little break now. Next session is 7:10, young people and marine conservation. So look forward.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Sanjay.